This is lesson 7 in domain 10. The title of this lesson is Will This War Never End? At the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to explain who Martha Washington was and why she was important. Based on her last name, I'm sure you can guess who she is already, but you'll also be able to go into a little bit more details as to why she was so important. Of course, like always, we do have some vocabulary words you will need to know while you're listening to this reading. The first one is confident, to be self-assured or certain or sure of something. Surrendering, declaring oneself the loser, thus ending a conflict. And wilderness, an area of land where very few people live. By the spring of 1778, General Washington and his Continental Army at Valley Forge were in much better spirits. Soldiers and supplies had arrived from France, the army was better prepared, and the bitterly cold winter weather was behind them. They were ready to take on the British once more. Fighting continued all across the colonies, on land and on sea, and into the wilderness west of the Mississippi River. Will this war never end? People wondered. Is it worth the loss of so many lives? The war was shifting south now, and the British, under the command of General Cornwallis, felt confident that they could defeat the colonial militia at long last. Indeed, the British won quite a few battles in the South, but little did they know that their successes were about to end. In 1781, 6 long years after the very first shot of the war was fired in Lexington, Massachusetts, things began to look promising for the Continental Army. George Washington received news that 28 French ships were on their way to the coast of Yorktown, Virginia, where General Cornwallis and the Redcoats were camped. He was very excited. George Washington came up with a plan to trap the British. General Washington's troops, now camped in New York, marched all day and often through the night to Yorktown, Virginia, a town built on the banks of the York River, just a little inland from the Atlantic Ocean. While Washington moved his troops overland, French ships moved in by sea. The British couldn't escape by land because the Continental Army was blocking them, and they could not escape by sea because the French ships were blocking them there. George Washington and his forces had the British blocked from both sides. British drummer boys waved a white flag to show they were surrendering. The bands are rumored to have played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." It must surely have seemed like an upside-down world to the British, who were used to winning wars and ruling colonies. Now they had lost a war. They were no longer ruling over the American colonies. The British Army had captured Yorktown. The British Army was captured at Yorktown, and all the fighting in the colonies soon ended. The British sailed home, and George Washington stepped down as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. It took 2 years of meetings in Paris, France, to plan for peace. In 1783, Benjamin Franklin was there to sign the peace agreement that gave the American colonies their independence. They were finally free of British rule. They would no longer have to pay taxes to the British king. Their new nation reached from Canada in the north to Florida in the south, to the Mississippi River in the west. Now that the British were no longer in charge of the colonists, the colonists did not have to obey the rules of a distant king, who would rule the new nation? Some suggested that George Washington be made king. King, he scoffed. We have been fighting to rid ourselves of a king. Our new government must be one where the people rule. But how would that happen? George Washington, exhausted by 6 years of battle, wanted only to go back to his family. He loved Mount Vernon, his home on the Potomac River in Virginia. He dreamed of being able to ride peacefully about his farm, listening to birdsong instead of shouting out orders to his men. Washington's wife, Martha, had been a great help to him during the war, bringing food and clothing to his troops during their long, hard winters, and even camping out with them in their field tents. She, too, looked forward to spending time with her husband in the comfort of Mount Vernon. But George Washington was not able to relax on his farm for too long, as you will soon learn. So, towards the end of this reading, we learned exactly who Martha Washington was and what kind of role she played and why she was important. If you need to remind yourself of anything else throughout this lesson, please go back and review that. When you are finished, please return to Seesaw to complete the activity that goes along with this lesson.